Hello everyone, welcome to our animated philosophy series, where we explore timeless concepts in a modern context. In today's session, we're going to explore the fascinating intersection between logical positivism and moral philosophy. Specifically, we will discuss how logical positivism, a 20th century movement that sought to ground all meaningful statements in empirical verification, views ethical and moral claims. Let's start by looking at one of the key ideas of logical positivism, the verification theory of meaning. According to this theory, a statement is only meaningful if it can either be empirically verified, that is, tested and proven through observation, or if it is analytically true, like a mathematical or logical statement. An example of an analytically true statement would be, a square always has four sides. This is true by definition. On the other hand, a statement like water boils at 100 dC is empirically verifiable. You can conduct an experiment to check whether this claim holds true. But here's where the problem arises for moral and ethical statements. Take, for instance, the claim murder is wrong. Can you measure the wrongness of murder in a laboratory? Can you observe it under a microscope or calculate it through logic alone? According to the verification theory, the answer is no. You cannot empirically test the claim that murder is wrong in the same way you can test whether water boils at a certain temperature. As a result, logical positivists label such statements as non-cognitive. What do we mean by non-cognitive? Essentially, logical positivists argue that ethical propositions don't express factual claims about the world. Instead, they express the speaker's emotional attitudes or moral preferences. When someone says, murder is wrong, they aren't making a factual statement like the sky is blue. Rather, they are expressing a feeling or a disapproval towards the act of murder. Let's delve a little deeper into this. From a logical positivist's perspective, ethical and moral statements are akin to expressions of emotion. They fall under what we might call emotivism, a branch of metaethics that suggests moral statements are simply emotional reactions. So, when you say, murder is wrong, it's comparable to saying, boo to murder, or I disapprove of murder. In this view, moral discourse becomes less about objective facts and more about subjective feelings. This approach has significant implications for how we understand ethical debates. Let's consider an example, euthanasia or physician-assisted suicide. If one person claims, euthanasia is wrong, and another argues, euthanasia is morally acceptable, logical positivists would say that neither statement is factually right or wrong. Both are merely expressions of personal or cultural attitudes. The person opposing euthanasia is expressing their disapproval, while the one supporting it is expressing their acceptance. Neither proposition can be verified or falsified through empirical observation, so they aren't seen as truth-apt in the same way that scientific statements are. But this leads us to an interesting question. If ethical and moral statements are non-cognitive and merely expressions of emotion, does that mean moral debates are pointless? If we're all just expressing feelings, does that render any meaningful dialogue on ethics impossible? The logical positivist view certainly presents a challenge here. It suggests that when we engage in moral debates, we might be less interested in discovering objective truths and more interested in persuading others to share our emotional attitudes. For instance, when we argue about issues like climate change, animal rights, or social justice, we might think we're discussing facts, but according to logical positivism, we're often expressing deeply held emotions and attempting to sway others to feel the same way. One of the main criticisms of this view is that it can appear overly dismissive of ethical reasoning. If moral statements are purely emotional expressions, what happens to the rich history of moral philosophy that involves reasoning, argumentation, and careful analysis of principles? Think of philosophers like Immanuel Kant, who believed moral judgments could be derived from rational thought, or John Stuart Mill, who argued that we can reason about moral principles based on consequences. Logical positivism seems to sweep all of this away by reducing morality to mere emotional expression. That said, the logical positivist approach forces us to think more critically about the nature of ethical statements. If we accept that these statements can't be empirically verified, it pushes us to ask, what role do ethical debates play in society? Are they about persuading others to feel a certain way? Are they about shaping cultural norms rather than discovering objective truths? In contemporary philosophy, while the verification principle has largely fallen out of favor, its influence remains strong, especially in discussions about the nature of language and meaning. Many philosophers today still wrestle with the challenge of explaining how moral claims can be meaningful if they cannot be empirically verified. So, how does this all impact our approach to moral philosophy today? Well, It leads us to recognize that ethical statements may not function in the same way as factual ones. This doesn't necessarily diminish their importance but shifts how we understand and use them in discussions. In many modern ethical debates, whether we're discussing human rights, medical ethics, or environmental responsibility, logical positivism reminds us that our moral claims might reflect more about our emotional and societal context than any objective reality. In conclusion, the logical positivist position on ethical statements challenges us to rethink the nature of moral discourse. By categorizing moral propositions as non-cognitive, it suggests that much of our moral language expresses emotions rather than facts. This perspective has profound implications for how we engage in ethical debates, compelling us to examine the emotional underpinnings of our moral convictions and how they shape our discussions in society today. Thank you for joining this discussion, and I hope this has provided you with a clearer understanding of how logical positivism views ethical statements. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more insights into similar echoes.